Yellow everyone, and yeah, I'm back. Sorry for being gone for a month, but college got the best of me and now I have a little bit of time to record this video. For the longest time I've been interested in the Corvette, and a few months back I sat in a C8 and was even more fascinated with them. So I decided to make a video explaining about the best variant. Although what the best variant is a subjective matter, in my honest opinion, the best variant of each generation is the one that is the most track focused, capable, and is the ultimate performance, which is what I've done for my previous videos about other cars. Anyways, thanks for coming back and I hope you enjoy. Starting with the first Corvette, the C1 Corvette went through three major changes. The first one lasted from 1953 to 1955, the second was from 56 to 57, and the last one was from 1958 to 1960. Then there were minor changes that were made in the last couple of years of production, which was from 1961 to 1962. This is also the best year to get the most performance-oriented C1 Corvette. Although the C1 never got real and proper performance modifications or trim levels added to it, it did have an option of having a 5.4-liter V8 small block that made around 360 horsepower. Moving on to the C2 Corvette. This is the first Corvette that introduced performance variants to the Corvette. It had only two major changes in its lifetime this time around, which ranged from 1962 to 1964, and another from 1965 to 1967. The main reason why I had a major change was because in the first half it had a split window design in the back, but due to regulations Chevy had to change it from a split window to a full window, which in my opinion looks better. Getting to the variants, besides the base model, the Corvette introduced the first ever Z06 model, which brought new additions like better brake components, front anti-roll bar, and better suspension. It also was optioned with a bigger fuel tank, and the only engine option available for this variant was the 5.4 liter that produced 360 horsepower. The other variant that was made was called the Grand Sport, and only 5 examples were made. Although Zora, the father of the Corvette, wanted to make 125 examples of this specific variant of cars, Chevy soon caught on and stopped production. This C2 was an absolute beast and was meant to compete against cars like the Shelby Cobra. It had many upgrades added to it. It was also offered with many different engine options, but the best one was a 377 cubic inch or the 6.2 liter engine producing 550 horsepower, but many said it could produce up to 600 in real-world conditions. Chevy back then tended to undervalue how much their engines could produce. Though if you have some spare change laying around and want to get the best variant of the C2, you can get an officially licensed C2 Grand Sport in modern day, built the exact same way as they would have been built back then, for a small price between $250,000 to $300,000, made by Super Performance. Moving on from a bombshell of a car that the C2 was and onto the C3, this generation of Corvette is more memorable due to its design and less for its performance, since later model years heavily worsened because of emissions and safety regulations. This generation of Corvette also went through three major changes, ranging from 1968 to 1971 for the first one. The second one was from 1972 to 75, and the last one was from 76 to 82. Once again, this generation brought new and iconic variants to the Corvette lineup, that being the ZL1, ZR1, and ZR2. The ZR1 was the best one out of all these since it had the L88 engine, which was 7 liters of goodness. It was rated between 430 and 460 horsepower, however real-world examples are saying it could have been rated closer to 560 horsepower. This was offered only in 1969, which was the last year they could make such an amazing engine before having to be limited by emissions. Later designs, more specifically the 1981, was the last year that the C3 could be bought with a manual, because the 1982 model year was the first model that came only with an automatic and the first ever crossfire injection system. The 1981 model year Corvette was also the best in terms of aerodynamics, suspension, and other sorts of performance values, but it lacked the more hardcore components of suspension performance values and engine power which the ZR1 had. So theoretically, to get the best in modern ZR1 C3 is to get a 1981 C3 Corvette, then add an L88 engine to it, and tune it to have around 560 horsepower. Getting into the C4 Corvette. This was the Corvette that started the modern styling and idea of the later generations of Corvette. There wouldn't be major changes made to the C4 lifetime, which spanned from 1984 to 1995, but there would be a minor one that changed the body styling of the C4 in 1990. It was also the year that brought back the ZR1 nameplate. Once again, every time the ZR1 nameplate comes around, it comes around packing heat. At the peak of the C4 ZR1, it featured the LT5, which was a 5.7 liter V8 engine. Chevy worked with Lotus to make it produce a whopping 405 horsepower. The start of the 5th gen Corvette, or the C5 Corvette, lasted from 1997 to 2005 and was the last Corvette to have pop-up headlights. The C5 Corvette began the process of not changing the appearance of the car unless there was a new variant added. It wouldn't follow the same process of older generations where they would change the look or refresh them every few years. This time around, the C5 Corvette also didn't bring back the ZR1 nameplate, but they did reintroduce introduced the Z06. It was basically the ZR1 of this generation, but the reason they didn't make the ZR1 was because the C5 was already miles ahead of the C4. It introduced a transaxle configuration which further balanced the 50-50 weight ratio, and the performance difference from the C4 and C5 was large. The C6 made its debut in 2001 with the LS6 engine and made 385 horsepower. In 2002, they would increase that to a staggering 405 horsepower. This car would shape the beginnings of something way bigger in the next 2 generations to come. The Corvette that I would say is the most iconic and what really took everyone by storm. The C6 Corvette, which lasted from 2005 to 2013, and I myself have sat in one, and not any normal Corvette. It was the iconic yellow, a 2006 C6 Z06 that my friend had for a little while. The car was something else. Yeah, it felt a bit cheap. Yeah, it was a little bit dated and interesting as a whole, but I liked that stuff about the car. That gave it its own uniqueness. Before I continue on my experience, the C6 came with both prior famous variants, that being the Z06 and ZR1. This time around, Chevy would keep both nameplates alive and at the same time have a variety of variants that people could choose from. The base was the starting level, the Z06 was the mid-range, and the top of the line was the Blue Devil, or otherwise called the ZR1. The Z06 featured an amazing LS7, which was 7-liter V8 of pure American power that produced 505 horsepower, to which I remember my friend starting, and you can feel the entire car shake as the engine was warming up and running. The car was so light you could feel even more of the engine because of how it was just made. Feeling the power as my friend guessed it only halfway up to the RPM range, which is around 4,300 if I remember, and it felt stupid fast. The fact that the ZR1 would further elevate from the Z06 performance was even the crazier part. It would be revealed in 2007 and would entail a smaller yet still very potent engine. It boasted this LS9, which was a 6.2-liter supercharged engine that made 638 horsepower. It was also capable of achieving a top speed of 205 fucking miles an hour, while also having an amazing handling capabilities. It wasn't your average American muscle car. It was an American sports car that can handle, feel nimble, and just drive well without having to use brute force. Just how like a well-balanced and well-made sports car would feel. The 7th generation of the Corvette, or the C7, would last from 2014 to 2019. It would be the last generation that would utilize the old formula of the Corvette, that being front mid-engine, rear-wheel drive design. It would also be the first Corvette to feature a 7-speed manual as an option, which I think is a cool ass thing to have, and I would love to have one on my own. The C7 would carry over the trim levels from the C6, and yes, I know I'm not mentioning the Grand Sport, which has been available since like the C4, but I'm talking about the most track capable, ultimate performance, peak version of each generation of Corvette. Although I introduce other trim levels if they're available, at the end of each section I state which one is the best one. Anyways, getting back, the C7 would still be very much performance oriented. But because of the success of the C6, the C7 was still able to expand on many aspects, like adding more features, luxury aspects, and much more. The ZR1 variant of the C7 was no slacker either. It would feature the new LT5 engine. This is also a 6.2-liter supercharged engine that produced a staggering 755 horsepower. Alongside the ZR1, there's also a package that was introduced for it called the ZTK, which made the car even lighter and added more downforce features like a large rear wing. Getting into the final and current generation of the Corvette, that is the C8 Corvette. Introduced in 2020 and still being produced till this day, it garnered a larger audience because of its overall design and mid-engine layout, but also sparked controversy with how Chevy decided to go around in making this generation of Corvette. Many Corvette purists or fans of older Corvettes don't seem to agree with the mid-engine layout. However, I don't actually mind it. At first I didn't like it, nor the fact that they made a mid-engine, but I'm a large fan of mid-engine designs, and this only further elevates the performance of the Corvette. This would be the first Corvette to also feature all-wheel drive and hybrid systems. A hybrid Corvette would be called the E-Ray, alongside the Z06 and recently revealed ZR1. However, there's going to be an even more powerful and performance version called the Zora. The Z06 would introduce the LT6 engine, which is a 5.5-liter flat-plane crank. Natural aspirated engine makes a staggering 670 horsepower. The ZR1 would once again elevate the performance and would introduce the LT7, which is the same engine as the LT6, but also is the first time that the Corvette would see turbos be added to it. 2 of them, of course. It would produce a stupid 1,064 horsepower while also adding aero and downforce features. People can also option for the ZTK like in the C7 to add even more and make sure that the car can put down all that power. The last one is Zora, which seems to look similar to the ZR1 but will feature a hybrid system. Now, at least to my knowledge, I don't know if it's going to be all-wheel drive or if the hybrid system will also drive only the rear wheels. Not much is known about this variant. There is one thing that I do miss and don't like about this generation of Corvette though, and it's the fact that it doesn't feature the cool ass 7-speed manual. I get that the DCT is better because it will shift faster and all that nonsense, but I still want some enjoyment out of the car. Despite me talking about the ultimate performance and a DCT would fit best, being able to have a manual and shift your own gears is just a different feeling. Let the owners of the Corvette express that American freedom. Let us be able to have a manual option alongside the base, mid-tier, and high-tier variants of the car. Do something different, do something better than the 911. Let us have the fastest and most ultimate version of the Corvette, that be either the ZR1 or the Zora, be available with a manual. So then you would have the fastest DCT car and the fastest manual car as an option. That's at least how I think. And as I said at the start, I've sat in a C8 and it was just a different experience, and I could tell easily that a manual would be possible. Despite me talking about all these performance variants, I don't have the money to afford any of them, unfortunately. However, I still think that Chevy should take into consideration at least the manual option to get back at some of their old customers and new customers that would be interested in such configuration. And getting back to the whole point of this video, hopefully you learned something new about the Corvette, and I'll quickly go over the best variants of each generation. Starting with the C1, it would be the 1962 model year with a 5.4 liter. The C2 would be the Grand Sport. The C3 would be the 1981 model year with a retrofitted L88 engine. The C4 would be the 1995 ZR1. The C5 would be the 2004 Z06. The C6 would be the ZR1. The C7 would be with the ZR1 with the ZTK, and finally the C8 is either the ZR1 or Zora, whichever will perform better. Of course, all of them are option with the manual minus the C8 unless, they do something. Anyways, thanks for watching. That's about it. See ya.